and also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today, we'll be doing our grade 4 English lesson on adjectives. So, we're going to do our grade 4 English lesson on adjectives. And before we start with our lesson on adjectives, we're going to log into aplusstudents.ca. We're going to log in with our username as well as our password, and then select the subject of language arts, grade 4. Once we have selected the subject of language arts, grade 4, and then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of adjectives. And under the chapter of adjectives, we are going to be focusing on only 2 of those 4 lessons today. All right, so our chapter is adjectives. The subject that we are focusing on is language, which is English language arts. Grade 4. And the lessons that we are going to be focusing on under our chapter of adjectives is, does the adjective tell us what kind or how many? And to identify the adjective that describes the noun. And we are doing our tutorial lesson on aplusstudents.ca. All right, so we're going to start now. So an adjective, right? It's a word that tells us about the noun, right? So an adjective either tells us about the noun, or it modifies the noun, or we can say describes the noun, right? That is an adjective. So an adjective, it's a word that tells us about the noun, right? And some adjectives, right, they answer questions like what kind, and other questions will ask how many. So adjectives will either ask us what kind. It's like you ask yourself, like, what kind? And then also how many. And if we look at an example of adjectives that answer the question what kind, and then we can say, it says, the small baby smiled. So the small baby smiled. So it's like asking yourself, like, what kind of baby? right? And then we say it's the small baby. So basically, small is our adjective that describes the baby. So a small baby smiled. And then we look at another example that says she carried heavy books. So she carried heavy books. So what kind of books did she carry? Heavy books, meaning the books was heavy. So she carried heavy books. So basically, we are describing the noun, right? So we describe the baby as it being a small baby, and we describe the books as in heavy books. So it's like asking yourself, like, what kind of baby? We say small baby. And what kind of books? We say heavy books. And that is basically adjectives that answer the question, what kind? And then we also have some adjectives that answer the questions, how many? So we have adjectives that answer the question, how many? So basically, one baby smiled. So how many babies smiled? One baby smiled, right? One baby smiled. So it's like asking how many babies smiled? One baby smiled. So one is our adjective that describes or tells us how many babies smiled. And she carried some books. Remember, how many doesn't have to be in the form of numbers. It doesn't have to be 1 to 10, 1 to 100, for example. We can say some, many, and so on. A lot. And in this case, she carried some books. So some, it tells us how many. So how many books did she carry? Some books. How many babies smiled? One baby smiled. And once again, an adjective, it's a word that tells you about the noun. An adjective either describes a noun, modifies a noun, or like we say, it just tells us about a noun. And we see that we are doing our lesson on aplusstudents.ca. So let us go to aplusstudents.ca. And we see that we are focusing on two of the lessons, that is, does the adjective tell you what kind or how many? And we're going to identify adjectives that describe the noun. So let's go into, does adjectives tell us what kind or how many? All right, so we see an adjective is a word that either tells you about the noun, or describes a noun, or it modifies a noun. All right. And some of the adjectives, right, it answers the question, what kind? So some adjectives that answer the question, what kind? And we made an example of the small baby smile. What kind of baby smile? The small baby smiled. And then she carried heavy books. So heavy being, so heavy telling us what kind. And then some adjectives that answer questions of how many. One baby smiled. So we said some questions that some adjectives that answer questions how many, right? So if we say one baby, how many babies? One baby smiled. And she carried some books. So that is basically the adjectives, right? That either asks us or let's say the answer questions like what kind or how many. And once again, an adjective, it's a word that either tells us about the noun, describes a noun, or it modifies a noun. So now if we look at the first activity, it says look at the adjective in italic. Does it tell us what kind or does it tell us how many? So we need to say if it tells us what kind or if it tells us how many. Look at the calm sea. So look at the calm sea. Look at the word calm. Does it either asks us what kind, that sentence, or how many? Look at the calm sea. Does it tell us what kind or how many? So look at the calm sea. Calm, the word calm. Does this tell us what kind or does it tell us how many? Does it tell us what kind or does it tell us how many? So if we look at the word calm, then we can say what it is, what kind. So it's what kind. So it's like what kind of sea? Then you say it's the calm sea. So the calm sea. And they basically tell us what kind. So let's look at the calm sea. So it's like asking ourselves, what kind of sea? So we are what kind? Now we need to look at the adjective in italic. Does it tell you what kind or how many? Tina took out some crayons. Tina took out some crayons. So Tina took out some crayons. Some. We need to say if it is what kind or how many. So if we look at the word some, right? Remember with some, you can basically, it's asking how many. So you don't have to say one, two, three, four, 10 to 20 to 100, right? You can either say some, you can say little, you can say few. Those are words that you can use in order to describe the noun. And then we can say it says how many. So how many? So how many? So that basically tells us how many, or asks us how many. So in this case, only some crayons. So some crayons, it tells us how many. The pioneers built wooden shelters. So it's like, is it basically asking us what kind, or is it asking us how many? So the pioneers built wooden shelters. Are they asking us like what kind? So we can say the pioneers built wooden shelters. So wooden is our adjective that describes the type of shelters, right? So, which means that it basically asks questions like what kind. So, the pioneers built wooden shelters, and it is basically asking what kind, and it is a wooden shelter. So, now we're going on to the test. Look at the adjective in italics. Does it tell you what kind or does it tell you how many? There are 7 continents. So look at the adjective in italics. Does it tell you what kind or how many? There are 7 continents. 7 continents. So basically, it is asking us or telling us how many. So it's like asking us how many. So it's like asking how many continents are there? And are we saying 7 continents? So it's basically how many, because we can even count the amount of continents that there are. So 7. And they ask us how many. Now look at the adjectives in italic. We need to say if it tells us what kind or if it tells us how many. Sailors lowered their heavy anchor. So sailors lowered their heavy anchor. Heavy. Does it tell us how what kind or tells us how many? And yes, it tells us what kind, right? It tells us what kind. Well done. Tell us what kind of anchor. Now look at the adjective. Does it tell you what kind or how many? Many people visit our country. Many people visit our country. So does it tell us what kind or how many? And yes, it's basically asking us How many? Because they're saying many people visit our country. They're not giving us an estimated amount, but they are saying it's a lot of people. So many people visit our country. So it's how many. I like this lovely neighborhood. So I like this lovely neighborhood. So lovely, right, is our adjective. Does it basically ask us what kind or does it tell us how many? I like this lovely neighborhood. So I like this lovely neighborhood. Does it tell us what kind or how many? So I like this lovely neighborhood, which means that it's asking what kind. So we can say it is what kind. So what kind is correct? So now, does it tell us what kind or how many? Mitchell will write three sentences. Three sentences. Does it tell us what kind or how many? So Mitchell or Michelle will write three sentences. So they basically tell us how many, and that is correct. How many? So three sentences. How many? Five sentences. So how many is correct? So we say she gave Megan 4 quarters. 4 quarters. Does that tell us what kind or does it tell us how many? 4 quarters. And that is correct. It basically tells us what kind. I'm sorry, how many? Because it's telling us 4 quarters. So how many? Well done. So how many is correct? I like crisp toast. I like crisp toast. So I like crisp toasts. So does it tell us what kind or how many? So we can basically say it is what kind, because it's like asking yourself, what kind of toast? I like crisp toast. So what kind? Does it tell us what kind or how many? I like orange poppies. So I love orange poppies. Orange. So I love orange poppies. So it's basically we need to answer the question, does it tell you what kind or how many? So we need to say is it what kind or how many? Yeah, so basically it tells us what kind because it says I love orange poppies. So it's like what kind, right? So what kind of poppies? Orange poppies. So they tell us what kind. So it's orange poppies. What kind of poppies? Orange poppies, right? Now we're going on to describing our noun. We're going to describe our noun. So identify the adjective that describes the noun. So the gloomy day makes me want to take a nap. So the gloomy day makes me want to take a nap. If we identify the adjective within that sentence, we can say it is gloomy, which describes the type of day. So gloomy is our adjective. So we identified gloomy as being an adjective that describes the noun. So the adjective is gloomy. Select the adjective that tells us either what kind or how many. Eve read some magazines during the train trip. So Eve read some magazines during the train trip. Select the adjective that tells us how many. So if they want us to recognize the adjective that tells us how many, then it means that it says Eve read some. Then some will be our adjective. Some magazines during the train trip. So Eve read some magazines during the train trip. All right, so now we're going on to our test, right? Where we need to identify the adjectives that describe, the noun. We visited a baby factory. We need to select the adjective that tells you what kind. So we visited a busy factory. So what kind of factory? A busy factory. So busy being our adjective that tells us what kind. So busy it is. We enjoy the lovely night. So we can say we need to select the adjective that tells us what kind. And then we say we enjoy the lovely night. So lovely is our adjective that describes the night. Lovely night. And lovely is correct. She reads the long list. We need to select the adjective that tells you what kind. So select the adjective that tells you what kind. She reads the long list. So now we need to select the adjective that tells you what kind. She reads a long list. Is it long or is it list? All right, so we can then say it is long, right? So long is our adjective, and it basically tells you what kind. So now we need to select the adjective that tells you what kind. The weary sailors reached land. So is it sailors or weary? So the weary sailors reached land. Is it sailors or is it weary? So sailors or weary? So the weary sailors reached land. So which means that this is going to be the weary. What type of sailors or what kind of sailors? The weary sailors. So the weary sailors reached land. Do we say it is sailors or do we say it is weary? So we need to select the adjective that tells us what kind. So we can say it is the weary sailors. So it describes the type of sailors, right? All right, so this is now the end of our lesson on adjectives, and we only went over two of the lessons on adjectives. When we come back next time, we are going to focus on the identifying adjectives as well as other adjectives. So we have adjectives that either tells us what kind or how many, right? And then we basically need to say if it's either asking us what kind or how many. And we said an adjective, it describes, modifies, or tells us about a noun. So thank you very much, grade fours, for joining our class. And I really hope you're going to have a good day ahead. Goodbye.